A 19-year-old girl. A crumbling apartment that smells like spilled whiskey and old regret, and bruises on her face that never fully heal before new ones take their place. Across the street, inside a black luxury sedan, a man watches. He is not a hero, he will never claim to be, but tonight he has seen enough. What happens next will change both of their lives in ways neither of them could have predicted, and cost them more than either was prepared to pay. If this story finds you, hit like, drop your city in the comments, and follow all the way to the end. Let me see how far this reaches. Input. The alarm didn't wake Alara Voss. She hadn't been asleep. She had been lying on her side on the narrow mattress in the smaller of the apartment's 2 rooms, her knees pulled to her chest, listening to the sounds on the other side of the wall. The creak of her mother's recliner. The wet gurgle of liquor being poured. The television cycling through channels at a volume that rattled the baseboards, never settling on anything, because Sandra Voss didn't actually want to watch television. She wanted noise. She wanted the kind of noise that filled a room so completely that the silence inside her own skull couldn't creep back in. Alara knew the difference between her mother's drinking sounds. She had spent 19 years cataloging them the way other girls cataloged music or movie quotes or the names of boys they liked. There was the slow, methodical drinking of early evening, measured pours, long silences between them, the quiet of someone trying to take the edge off. There was the fast drinking of midweek, frantic, almost desperate, the sound of someone losing an argument with themselves. And then there was the drinking that came after midnight on a Friday, when Sandra had nothing to get up for the next morning and nowhere to be and no reason left in the world to slow down. Tonight was Friday. Alara kept her eyes on the water stain on the ceiling above her bed. It had spread since last winter, a dark bloom the color of old tea, shaped vaguely like something she'd stopped trying to identify years ago. She used to make shapes out of it when she was small. A dog. A map. A hand. She'd long since stopped playing that game. The stain was just a stain. The apartment was just an apartment. Her mother was just her mother. She heard the recliner creak hard, the specific creak that meant Sandra was pushing herself upright. Alara's body went still. Not tense. Still. There was a difference she had learned early. Tension made noise. Tension was shoulders rising, breath catching, the rustle of sheets. Stillness was something else entirely. Stillness was what Prey learned when it understood that moving was worse than waiting. The footsteps came down the short hallway. Uneven. The left foot heavier than the right, which was how Sandra walked when she was past a certain point in the bottle. Alara counted the steps without meaning to. 4 to the bathroom, 3 to the kitchen, 2 to her door. The footsteps stopped outside her door. Alara didn't breathe. The door opened anyway. Sandra Voss was 51 years old and looked closer to 65. She was not a large woman, she had never been large, but alcohol had done something to her frame over the years, thickened her through the middle while hollowing her face, so that she looked somehow both swollen and depleted at the same time. Her hair was the same dark brown as Alara's, but coarser, lank against her shoulders. She was still dressed in the clothes she'd worn yesterday, maybe the day before. Alara had stopped tracking that too. "You awake?" Sandra said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah." "Get up. I need cigarettes. It's past 1 in the morning. I know what time it is." Sandra's voice had that particular flatness that came at a certain blood alcohol level. Not slurred, not loud, just emptied out, like something had been scraped clean from the inside of it. "There's a gas station on Rector. They're open all night. Take the 10 from my purse." Alara sat up slowly. The cold hit her immediately. The radiator in her room had been broken for 3 weeks, and she'd put in a maintenance request that had disappeared into whatever void maintenance requests went to in a building like this one. She was wearing a long-sleeved thermal undershirt and sweatpants, and still the air had teeth. She reached for her hoodie on the floor beside the mattress. "Don't take all night," Sandra said. "I'm not." Alara pulled the hoodie on. Her left shoulder ached where it had connected with the kitchen counter 2 nights ago. Sandra had pushed her to, not hard, or not hard by Sandra's standards, but the corner had caught her at exactly the wrong angle, and the bruise had bloomed purple and deep, the kind that didn't respond to pressure or ice or anything except time. And time was the one thing Alara had never felt like she had enough of. She found the 10 in her mother's purse on the kitchen table. Sandra had followed her out of the hallway and was standing in the small living room, watching her with the unfocused attention of someone who had forgotten why they'd called you in the first place but wasn't ready to admit it. "Get 2 packs," Sandra said. "Marlboro Reds, not the lights. I hate the lights." "Okay. And don't stop to talk to anybody. You know how this neighborhood is." "I know." "I mean it, Alara." "I said I know, Mom." Something moved through Sandra's face then, a flicker of something that might have been guilt, or might have been the specific anger that guilt sometimes turned into when it had nowhere else to go. She looked at Alara for a moment longer than usual, looked at the fading mark along her daughter's jaw from 4 days ago, which had gone from purple to a sickly greenish yellow at the edges, the way bruises did in their final stages. Sandra looked away first. Alara put the 10 in the pocket of her hoodie, found her sneakers by the front door, and left. The street was quiet in the way that streets in that part of the city were quiet after midnight. Not peaceful, just temporarily emptied. The cold was sharp enough to make her eyes water the moment she stepped outside. The building's front door didn't lock properly anymore. It swung shut behind her with a sound like a cough. She walked with her head down and her hands in the front pocket of her hoodie, the money folded small against her palm. The sidewalk was uneven, heaved up in places by tree roots that the city had never gotten around to trimming back. She knew every crack and ridge of the 3 blocks between her building and the Rector Street gas station the way she knew the sounds of her mother's footsteps. By feel, without having to think about it. The cold helped, actually. It always had. There was something about air this sharp that cut through the particular fog that came from spending too many hours inside those walls, listening and waiting and cataloging. Outside, the fog thinned. She could breathe in a way she couldn't when she was in the apartment, fully, from the bottom of her lungs, without the instinct to stay quiet, pulling each breath short. She didn't let herself think about the shoulder, or the jaw. She had a system for that too. The gas station's fluorescent lights were brutal and cheerful in equal measure, flooding the forecourt in a cold white glare that made the night around it look darker by comparison. The attendant behind the counter was a man in his 50s who Alara had seen enough times that they had a wordless understanding. She didn't make conversation, he didn't either. They conducted their transaction in the efficient silence of 2 people who both wanted to be somewhere warmer. She bought the cigarettes. She started home. She was half a block from her building when she noticed the car. It was parked across the street from her building's entrance, engine idling, exhaust curling faintly in the cold air. A black sedan, not new exactly, but the kind of maintained that cost money, the kind of car that didn't belong on this block, in the same way that an expensive watch didn't belong on a certain kind of wrist. She noticed it the same way she noticed anything that was slightly wrong in her environment, the low-grade threat detection that had developed over years of learning to read rooms. She didn't stop walking, didn't look directly at it, kept her pace even and her shoulders low and her eyes on the cracked sidewalk ahead of her, but she clocked it, filed it, tucked it away in the same internal archive where she kept everything else she didn't know what to do with yet. She went upstairs, left the cigarettes on the kitchen counter, went back to her room, lay back down on the mattress. Her mother didn't come back to check on her. She stared at the water stain until the sound of the television finally went quiet, sometime around 3, and then she lay in the silence and listened to nothing. And eventually, without entirely meaning to, she slept. She didn't see the car again for 4 days. In those 4 days, the following things happened. She picked up 2 shifts at the laundromat on Bleecker where she worked 12 hours a week for cash, moving wet clothes from washers to dryers and folding things that belonged to strangers, and listening to the machines churn. She bought groceries with the last of her own money, which came to $43 and stretched if she was careful. And her mother hit her. It was a Thursday evening. Alara was at the kitchen table eating cereal. There was nothing else. The eggs had run out 2 days earlier. When Sandra came home from wherever Sandra had been and found something to be angry about. Alara never fully reconstructed the sequence of events afterward. She had long since stopped trying to trace the logic of her mother's rages, because they didn't have logic. They had momentum. They gathered and accelerated and then discharged. And what had set them off was almost beside the point. What she remembered clearly was the sound, the flat, hard sound of Sandra's open hand catching the side of her face, high on the cheekbone, the kind of blow that wasn't meant to hurt as much as it was meant to remind. And then the second blow, lower, across the jaw, harder than the first, which was always how it went. The first was impulse, and the second was commitment. Alara didn't cry. She had stopped crying during her mother's rages years ago, because crying prolonged them. She made herself a specific kind of gone instead. Not absent, just uninhabited, the way a building looks when all the lights are off. She waited. Sandra said things. She did not register the words. Sandra eventually ran out of force and retreated to her recliner, and Alara cleaned her face over the kitchen sink and went to her room and sat on the edge of the mattress and breathed. The right side of her face, from cheekbone to jaw, had gone from red to purple by the time she went to bed. In the morning, it was the color of thunderclouds. She went to her laundromat shift with her hair pulled forward and her head angled slightly down, the practiced geometry of someone who had learned to minimize. Most people didn't look closely. Most people didn't want to. She saw the car again on a Saturday afternoon. She was coming back from the grocery store. She'd managed $60 this week, an extra shift plus tips from helping a woman carry her wet laundry up 4 flights. And the black sedan was parked in the same spot across the street from her building. Same spot, same engine. She was almost certain it was the same car. This time she let herself look. The windows were tinted, but not so dark that she couldn't make out the shape of someone in the driver's seat. A man. Big through the shoulders. Still in the way that people who were comfortable being watched tended to be. Not tense, not caught, just present. She looked long enough to let him know she'd seen him. Then she went inside. That night, lying on the mattress with the sounds of her mother's television cycling through the wall, she thought about it. A man in an expensive car, parked on this street, twice. Watching her building, or watching something on this block that her building happened to be on. People with money and expensive cars didn't come to this neighborhood unless they owned something here, or were buying something here, or were looking for something here. She thought about what they might be looking for and felt a cold that had nothing to do with the broken radiator. But she didn't leave. She had nowhere to go. Talked. It was the following Tuesday night when things broke open. Sandra had been drinking since early afternoon. Alara could tell when she came home from the laundromat at 6. The apartment already sour with it. The specific atmospheric weight of a room that had been occupied by someone self-destructing for hours. She made herself scarce. She had a system for this too. Stay out of the main room, make no noise, offer no provocation, give the storm no surface to catch on. She was in her room with the door closed, attempting to read a library book she'd renewed twice because she kept losing her place, when she heard her mother on the phone. The words were indistinct at first, then louder. Then Sandra's voice acquired the particular pitch it got when she had been drinking long enough to stop moderating the volume. Not shouting, but carrying, filling the apartment the way water filled a container, finding every crack and space. Don't tell me what I do in my own house. I'll do what I want in my own house. A pause. Then, you don't know what she's like. You don't know. She's been a problem since the day she was born. Don't look at me like... Another pause. Sandra was talking to someone on the phone who was apparently pushing back. Alara pressed herself against the headboard and pulled her knees up and tried to be the specific kind of gone she was good at being. Fine, fine, I don't need this. I don't need any of this. The phone call ended with the particular violence of a screen being tapped too hard. Then silence. Then footsteps. The door opened without a knock. It had never come with a knock. And Sandra was standing in the doorway with a glass in one hand and an expression on her face that Alara had catalogued and filed under worst ones. Her eyes were bright with the specific glitter of someone who had been drinking long enough to get past maudlin and into something harder. You talked to your aunt, Sandra said. I haven't talked to Aunt Carol in 3 months. Don't lie to me. I'm not lying. She called me tonight. Sandra's voice was getting that terrible evenness again, the emptied-out flatness. Asking about you. Asking if you were okay. She said the last 2 words like they tasted wrong. Why would she be calling asking if you were okay unless somebody told her something? I don't know. I didn't talk to her. Alara. Mom, I swear. Sandra threw the glass. Not at Alara. At the wall beside the door, which was probably not a distinction that mattered much in the moment. The glass hit the drywall and shattered, and the sound was enormous in the small room, a crack, and then a scatter, and then silence. Sandra's face had gone very red. You think you can go around talking about our family to people? Her voice had lost the evenness now. You think that's what you do? You think that reflects well on... She came into the room. Alara got off the bed on the far side. She'd learned years ago to keep the mattress between them if she could, to create distance, to buy time for the storm to break before it landed. She stood with the bed between them, her back against the wall, her hands at her sides. I didn't call Aunt Carol. You're lying. I'm not. Check my phone, check my call history. I haven't called her. Something moved through Sandra's face that might have been doubt, but doubt in that state was unstable. It could go anywhere. She stood at the foot of the bed and breathed hard through her nose and looked at Alara with eyes that were and weren't her mother's, depending on which way you measured it. Then she moved around the bed. Alara moved too, toward the door, which was still open, the path out still clear. She was almost through it when Sandra caught her by the arm and yanked her back hard enough that she hit the door frame with her right shoulder, her already damaged left shoulder taking a glancing impact that made her vision white out for half a second. Sandra's hand came up. Alara turned her face away from it and took the blow on the side of her head, up near the temple. Not the jaw this time. The temple, which was worse and rang differently, a deep vibration that went all the way through her skull and kept going. She didn't fall. She had learned not to fall unless she had to. She held the door frame with both hands and kept herself upright and waited. Sandra hit her again, lower, and then the momentum broke the way it always broke, suddenly, without announcement, like a wave that just spent itself. And Sandra stepped back and made a sound that might have been a sob or might have been something else, and pressed her hand over her mouth and stood there looking at her daughter with something she couldn't maintain eye contact with for very long. Get out of my face, Sandra said finally. Her voice had gone soft and ruined. Alara went to the bathroom. She ran cold water and pressed a folded washcloth against the side of her head and stared at her own reflection in the mirror above the sink. The fluorescent bulb was buzzing on one side, had been for months. Her face looked greenish in it. The bruising from last week was still visible, faded to that sick yellow at the edges. And now there was new redness along the temple that would be purple by morning. She pressed the washcloth harder and breathed and did not cry. Outside the bathroom, the television came on again. She didn't sleep that night. She lay on the mattress and watched the ceiling and thought about the things she thought about when sleep wouldn't come, which was not the past because the past was too heavy, and not the future because the future was too vague, but the immediate. The next hour, the next day, the mechanics of survival mapped out in small concrete steps. Get through tonight. Get to the laundromat tomorrow. $60. Groceries. Back here. Around 4 a.m, she found herself thinking about the car. The black sedan. The man with the broad shoulders sitting still, watching. She didn't know why she thought about him specifically. Maybe because he was the only thing in recent memory that had been different, that had been outside the pattern. She stared at the ceiling and thought about the shape of him through the tinted glass, the stillness of him, the quality of it. And then she stopped thinking about it and tried to sleep, and eventually, barely, did. She was coming home from the laundromat the next evening when she saw the police cars. 2 of them parked in front of her building, lights going but no sirens. An officer she didn't recognize was standing near the entrance talking into a radio. A small cluster of neighbors had gathered at a respectable distance, the way people did, close enough to watch, far enough to not be involved. Alara stopped on the sidewalk. Her first thought was her mother. Her second thought was also her mother. She pushed through this cluster of neighbors carefully, not running, because running attracted the wrong attention. One of the neighbors, Mrs. Okafor from the second floor, who had never once made direct eye contact with Alara, but always seemed to know everything that happened in the building, glanced at her sideways. They took your mother, Mrs. Okafor said, in the low, even voice of someone delivering information they'd been holding on to. Alara stopped moving. What? Hour ago. She went out for something, down on the corner, got into it with a police officer who told her to move along. Mrs. Okafor paused. She hit him. Alara stood very still. They arrested her, Mrs. Okafor continued. Took her in the car. I saw from my window. Okay. Alara's voice came out steady, which surprised her. Okay. Thank you. She went upstairs. The apartment was quiet, in a way it had never been quiet before. Not the tense quiet of her mother being somewhere in it, possibly asleep, Possibly not, but genuinely, completely empty. The television was off. The recliner was empty. Sandra's coat was still on the hook by the door. Alara stood in the middle of the living room and looked at the empty recliner for a long time. Then she sat down on the floor, her back against the couch, and she stayed there for a while without moving, without thinking, just existing in the silence of the apartment and trying to remember the last time it had felt like this. Like no one was going to come through any door. Like she didn't have to listen. She couldn't remember. Eventually she got up. She heated soup from a can. She ate it at the kitchen table. She washed the bowl and the pot and put them away. She went to her room. She sat on the edge of the mattress and looked at the floor. Her phone had a text from the laundromat manager about the schedule for next week. Nothing else. She turned the phone over in her hands for a while, then set it on the mattress. She thought about what Mrs. Okafor had said. Took her in the car. She wasn't sure what happened after that. Whether it was a night in holding and then released, whether there were charges that would stick, whether her mother would be back tomorrow morning or the morning after that, or whether this was somehow longer. She knew almost nothing about how any of that worked. What she knew was that tonight the apartment was quiet, and sometime in the middle of that quiet, between eating and sitting and not sleeping, she went to the window. She stood at the edge of it, not full in the frame, an old habit, staying close to the wall rather than visible in the center, and looked down at the street. The black sedan was there. Same spot, engine idling, exhaust in the cold air. She stared at it for a long time. It didn't move. No one got out. She stepped back from the window and sat down on her mattress and thought about what it meant and couldn't find an answer and eventually lay down and stared at the ceiling and tried to sleep. She was still staring at the ceiling at 11:15 when she heard a knock at the front door of the apartment. Not loud, measured. 3 deliberate knocks, evenly spaced. Nobody knocked on Sandra Voss's door. Landlord left notes. Neighbors didn't bother. Carol hadn't visited in years. Alara sat up. 3 knocks. Even. Patient. She went to the door in her socks, moving quietly out of habit, and put her eye to the peephole. The man in the hallway was tall and broad and wearing a dark coat. His face was angular and composed, the face of someone who was not accustomed to waiting but was doing it anyway, deliberately, as a choice rather than a default. His hair was dark. There was a quality to his stillness that she recognized without being able to name it. It was the same quality she'd clocked through tinted glass from half a block away. Alara's hand went to the chain on the door. The chain was on. She left it on. "Who are you?" she said through the door. A pause. Then, "My name is Dante Moretti." His voice was level and not loud, carrying through the door without effort. "I've been watching your building for 3 weeks. I think you know that." The cold that moved through her had nothing to do with the broken radiator. "What do you want?" she said. Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice was still level, still unhurried, as if he had all the time he needed and had already decided to take it. "To tell you something you need to hear," he said, "about your mother, about what happens when she gets out." Another pause. "And to give you something that nobody's ever given you before." She put her hand flat against the door. Her heart was doing something irregular against her ribs. "What's that?" she said. "A choice," he said. The word landed in the silence of the apartment and sat there. Alara stared at the back of the door, at the peephole, at the shape of him on the other side of it. Her hand stayed on the chain. She did not open the door yet, but she did not walk away. She left the chain on for another full minute. Dante Moretti didn't knock again, didn't shift his weight or clear his throat, or do any of the things people did when they were performing patience rather than actually having it. He just stood there on the other side of the door, and the quality of his stillness was so complete that if she hadn't seen him through the peephole, she might have wondered if she'd imagined the knock entirely. She hadn't imagined it. She put her eye back to the peephole. He was looking directly at the door, not at the peephole specifically, just at the door, the way someone looked at a thing they were waiting for and had already made their peace with the waiting. His hands were at his sides. His coat was good quality, dark wool, the kind that cost real money. His face was not a kind face, but it was not a cruel one either. It was a face that had made a lot of decisions and stopped apologizing for them. "How do you know my mother?" Alara said through the door. "I don't," he said. I know about her, that's different. You've been watching this building for 3 weeks and you don't know her. I've been watching you, he said. Simple. No apology in it. The cold moved through her again. That's not better, she said. No, he agreed. It's not. She pulled back from the peephole and stood in the dark hallway of the apartment with her hand still flat against the door and thought about what she knew, which was almost nothing. His name, his car. The fact that he'd been watching for 3 weeks and hadn't done anything, which was either reassuring or the most frightening thing about the whole situation, depending on how you looked at it. She thought about calling someone. Her phone was on the mattress in her room. She could get it, call the police, tell them there was a man at the door. They would come. They would check. He would probably be gone by then, and then her mother would get out, tomorrow or the day after or next week, and the apartment would fill back up with the weight of her. Alara took the chain off the door. She opened it the length of her foot, not wide, not welcoming, just enough to see him properly, and for him to see her, and for the air from the hallway to come in, which smelled like the building's particular combination of old carpet and other people's cooking. Up close, Dante Moretti was bigger than he'd appeared through glass. Not heavy. Built. Which was different. The kind of frame that suggested a specific kind of history. He was looking at her face with an expression that was clinical in its steadiness, taking in the bruising at the temple, the faded yellowing along the jaw, the specific topography of someone who had been hit recently, and before that, and before that. His expression didn't change while he looked, which was somehow more unsettling than if it had. You're Alara Voss, he said. You already know that. Yes. Then why say it? Because I wanted you to know that I know it, he said. I'm not going to pretend I don't know things I know. That's not how I operate. She studied him. How do you operate? Directly, he said. Can I come in? No. He nodded. Not offended. Not surprised. Okay, then I'll say what I came to say from here. He put one hand in his coat pocket. Slowly, no sudden movement, the deliberate care of someone who understood that sudden movements in doorways had consequences, and produced nothing. Just rested his hand there. Your mother was arrested tonight for assaulting a police officer. You know that already. Yes. She's going to be held until her arraignment. Given her record, 2 prior misdemeanors, one of which was also assault. The DA is going to push for a custodial sentence. Could be 30 days, could be 90. Depends on the judge and whether her public defender is any good, which they usually aren't. He said all of this in the same even tone, factual and unadorned. When she gets out, she's going to be angrier than when she went in. That's how it works. The system doesn't fix people like your mother. It just interrupts them. Alara didn't say anything. The bruising on your face is consistent with at least 2 separate incidents in the last 10 days, he continued. The one on your jaw is older. The one at your temple is from last night or the night before. He paused. I'm not asking you to confirm that. I can see it. You said you wanted to give me a choice, Alara said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. What choice? He looked at her for a moment. Not tonight. Tonight, I just wanted you to know who I am and that I'm not here to take something from you. He pulled his hand out of his coat pocket and held out a card. Plain white, no logo, just a number in small print. When you're ready to hear it, call that number. Doesn't matter what time. She didn't take the card. Who are you? She said. Not the name. She had the name. What are you? Something moved through his face. Not discomfort. More like recognition, the look of someone who had been asked a question they'd given an honest answer to before and hadn't always been thanked for it. I run things in this part of the city, he said, and in several other parts. The kind of things that don't have office buildings. She looked at him. You're telling me you're... Yes, he said. The words sat between them in the open doorway. Alara gripped the edge of the door. Her knuckles were white against the wood and she couldn't decide if she was going to close it or not, and her heart was doing the irregular thing again against her ribs. Then why would I trust anything you say? She said. You shouldn't, he said, without missing a beat. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He nodded toward the card she hadn't taken. That's why there's no pressure. Call or don't. I'll be around either way. He held her gaze for another moment. Steady, undemanding, the eyes of someone who had learned to wait for things. And then he turned and walked back down the hallway toward the stairs without looking back. She stood in the open doorway and watched him go. The card was still in his hand when he turned the corner to the stairwell. He hadn't left it. He'd taken it back. She closed the door. She put the chain back on. She stood in the dark hallway for a long time. She didn't call. Not that night, not the next day. She went to her laundromat shift and moved wet clothes from washers to dryers, and folded the things that belonged to strangers, and thought about a plain white card with a number on it, which she hadn't been given and therefore couldn't call anyway, which made the whole question easier. Except it didn't, because she kept thinking about what he'd said. She's going to be angrier than when she went in. She knew that. She'd known it before he said it. She had been running the calculation in the back of her mind since Mrs. Okafor told her about the arrest, the same calculation she always ran when Sandra's pattern was interrupted. What happens next? What does the correction look like? What does she come back as when she comes back? The math always came out the same. An interruption to Sandra's drinking didn't produce reflection or contrition. It produced pressure that had been building for however long the interruption lasted, and pressure found its exits wherever it could. Alara knew what exit it would find. She ran the calculation and came up with the same answer and kept folding laundry. On her way home, she walked past a payphone that nobody had bothered to remove and thought about it for half a block, and then kept walking. It was 2 days later, a Thursday, when she came home from the grocery store and found him sitting on the front steps of her building. Not in the car, not across the street. On the steps, in the cold, in the same dark coat, with his forearms resting on his knees and his eyes on the middle distance. Like he'd been there long enough that he'd stopped performing the waiting and just settled into it. She stopped on the sidewalk. He looked up when her shadow hit the steps. His expression didn't change. "I don't have a number to call," she said. "I know. I should have left it." He reached into his coat and held out the card. She looked at it. Looked at him. Took the card. Put it in her jacket pocket without looking at the number. "Why are you sitting on my steps?" she said. "I wanted to tell you the rest," he said. "The rest of what?" "The choice." He moved over on the step, leaving space. Not an invitation exactly, more an option. "Sit down or don't. You can hear it standing." She didn't sit down. She shifted the grocery bag to her other hand and stood on the bottom step and looked at him and waited. He looked at her directly, no preamble. "I can get you out," he said. "Safe place to stay. Out of this neighborhood. No connection to anything that would follow you. Legal documents, all of it clean, done by a lawyer whose work holds up. I have contacts at 2 community colleges that take adult students with non-traditional situations, no questions about gaps in transcript or financial history." He paused. "And money for the first year. Not a loan, no conditions attached to it. Not from me, through a legitimate fund I set up 3 years ago for exactly this kind of situation." Alara looked at him. The cold was getting into her jacket. She could feel the groceries pulling at her arm. Canned beans, oatmeal, a half-price loaf of bread, $37 of careful choices. "Why?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. When he answered, his voice had changed slightly. Still even, but less clinical, like something had been moved aside. "Because I watched you for 3 weeks," he said, "and I know what I was watching." He stopped, then, "And because when I was 8 years old, somebody should have watched me the same way, and nobody did." She stood there. The wind came down the block and pushed at her hair, and she held the grocery bag and didn't say anything. "I'm not asking for anything back," he said. "Not gratitude, not loyalty, not anything that would put you in my debt, because I don't want you in my debt. The moment you take this, it's yours. I walk away. You never have to see me again if you don't want to." "You're a mafia boss," she said. "Yes." "You run things that don't have office buildings." "Yes." "And you're sitting on my front steps offering me—" She stopped. She didn't have a word for what he was offering. "Why wouldn't you want something back? People like you always want something back." His jaw tightened slightly. The first crack in the composure, small and immediate, and then gone. "I know what people think about people like me. I'm not going to argue with it." He looked at her. "But I'm also not going to apologize for what I am to make what I'm offering more palatable. You know what I am. This is still the offer." She looked at the card in her pocket. Back at him. At the building behind him. The broken front door, the window on the second floor with the cracked pane that had been cracked since she was 16. The fire escape with the railing that pulled away from the wall if you leaned on it wrong. My mother comes back, she said. She gets out. You think she just, what, doesn't notice I'm gone? She'll notice, he said. She won't be able to do anything about it. There was something in his voice when he said it that she didn't examine too closely. You can't promise that. I can promise that more than she can promise she won't put you in a hospital the next time, he said. Flat, factual. Not cruel, but not softened either. The word landed. Hospital. She had not let herself say that word, even in her own head. The calculation she'd been running had been deliberately vague on the outer end of its range, because looking directly at the outer end of the range was something she could not afford to do and still function. But he'd said it plainly, and now it was in the air between them, and she couldn't unsay it even inside herself. She looked at the building again. I need to think about it, she said. I know. I'm not saying yes. I know that too. She went inside. She climbed the stairs. She made dinner from the groceries, canned beans over rice, one of 7 variations in her rotation, and ate at the kitchen table in the silence of the apartment, which was still Sandra's silence, still the silence of Sandra's absence rather than real silence, the temporary quiet of a room waiting to be filled back up with its usual weight. She looked at the card on the table beside her bowl. 1 number, no name. She ate her dinner and washed the bowl and went to bed and lay in the dark and thought about what the outer edge of the range looked like when you let yourself look at it directly. She thought about it for a long time. Hotep. She called on a Friday morning, 6 days after the knock on the door, 4 days after the steps. He picked up on the second ring. I haven't said yes, she said. I just have questions. Ask them, he said. She'd written them on a piece of notebook paper because she didn't trust herself to remember them all under pressure. She looked at the paper. The safe place, she said. Is it one of your properties? Something connected to you? It's a property in a different borough, clean title, held by an LLC with no obvious connection to anything I operate. For what you need it for, it functions like a regular apartment. Who else would be there? No one. It's private. You'd have it to yourself. If I said yes and then changed my mind, what happens? You leave, he said. That's it. She looked at the next line on the paper. The legal documents. What kind? State ID. Social Security card if yours is compromised. Whatever you need to enroll in school and open a bank account. All legitimate. Nothing that expires or creates problems. How is that possible? A brief pause. I know people, he said. She stared at the paper. The next question was the one she'd written last, because it was the one she'd been most afraid to ask. Do you want me to be grateful? She said. Not just saying thank you, feeling it, owing it, because some people need that and it comes out sideways later. The silence on the line was longer this time. No, he said. How do I know that? You don't, he said. Not yet. That's one of the things you'd have to decide to find out. Another pause. But I'll tell you this, I have never in my life needed someone to be grateful to me. I have what I have. I built what I built. What I'm offering you has nothing to do with what I need. She looked at the wall of the kitchen. The crack that ran from the window frame diagonally toward the ceiling, the one she'd watched get longer every winter. My mother is out next week, she said. The public defender had called the building's landline. Sandra had no cell phone, and left a message on the machine that Alara had played twice with her hand on the receiver. Arraignment had gone worse than the best case, but better than the worst. 22 days. Released in 18 with good behavior, which in Sandra's case was a formality rather than a reflection of anything. 18 days from the arrest date. That was 2 days from now. I know, Dante said. Of course you do, she said, without bitterness. It was just true. He knew things. That was what he was. She looked at the notebook paper. She'd asked all the questions. She hadn't gotten certainty from any of the answers, but she'd known before she called that certainty wasn't on the table. Certainty had never been on the table, not in this apartment, not in this life. I'll call you, she said. Okay. She hung up. She sat at the kitchen table with the notebook paper in front of her, and the crack in the wall diagonal above her, and the sound of the upstairs neighbor walking their specific walk, and she thought about the outer edge of the range and what it looked like, and how long she had before it stopped being a projection and became a fact. 18 days from the arrest. 2 days from now. She thought about the length of the hospital word. She thought about a safe place in a different borough. She thought about legal documents, a bank account, a community college. She thought about the last time anyone had offered her anything without a catch visible from where she was standing, and she couldn't find one. She folded the notebook paper in half, in quarters. She put it in her pocket. She spent the rest of that day and all of the night going back and forth across the same ground, covering the same territory from different angles, looking for the thing she was missing, the catch she couldn't see, the price that would arrive later. She built the argument against it in her head and then demolished it and built it again. She made herself imagine her mother coming back through that door in 2 days and what that first night would look like, and she let herself look at it directly, all of it, the outer edge included, and she held it there and breathed. Sometime in the deep middle of the night, she stopped arguing with herself. She went to her closet and pulled out the backpack she'd carried through 2 years of high school before she'd stopped going. It was canvas, army green, one broken zipper that she'd replaced with a safety pin. She set it on the mattress. She did not start packing, not yet. She just looked at it for a long time. Then she went back to bed. In the morning, Saturday, overcast, the light through her window, the particular gray of a city that had forgotten what sun looked like. She picked up her phone and called the number on the plain white card. He picked up on the first ring this time. "Yes," she said, just the one word. Dante Moretti didn't say good or great or I knew you would. He said, "Noon on Monday, I'll be in front of your building." A pause. "Pack light, we can get whatever else you need." She said okay. She hung up. She stood in the center of her room with the phone in her hand and the backpack on the mattress and the water stain on the ceiling above her. And she felt something she didn't have a precise name for. Not relief exactly, not fear exactly, but something that had the texture of both. Something that lived in the space between them. She had 48 hours. She opened the backpack. She started with the photograph, the only one she had of herself before the bruises became routine, taken at maybe 7 years old in a school gymnasium somewhere. A gap-toothed kid in a yellow sweater who still believed in the basic safety of rooms. She folded it carefully and put it in the front pocket. Then she took it back out, looked at it for a long time, put it back in. She packed 2 changes of clothes, her toothbrush, a phone charger, the library book she still hadn't finished, the notebook paper, still folded to quarters, which she didn't fully understand why she was keeping but put in anyway. The backpack was less than half full when she was done. She sat on the edge of the mattress with the packed backpack beside her and the morning light going gray through the curtains, and she thought, this is it. This is what leaving looks like. A canvas bag with a broken zipper and a photograph of a kid who didn't know yet, less than half full. And then, from downstairs, the building's broken front door made its specific sound. The cough of it opening, the drag of it closing, and she heard footsteps in the stairwell. She knew those footsteps, the particular unevenness of them. Left foot heavier than the right. Her whole body went cold and still. 18 days from arrest. 2 days from now. Except it wasn't 2 days from now. The footsteps stopped outside her door. 3 knocks. Not measured. Not patient. Hard, flat. The knocks of someone who had been storing pressure for 18 days and was done. Elara didn't move. She sat on the edge of the mattress with the backpack beside her, and her hands flat on her thighs, and listened to the footsteps stop outside the door, and she thought, 18 days. The public defender had said 18 days minimum. She had counted. She had been careful about the counting. But the footsteps were her mother's footsteps. She knew them the way she knew the water stain and the broken radiator and the sound the front door made when it closed. She knew them in her bones. 3 more knocks. Harder. Elara. Sandra's voice came through the door, stripped of everything except demand. Not drunk. Not yet. Which was almost worse. Sober Sandra had a precision to her that drunk Sandra lacked. Open this door. Elara looked at the backpack. She thought about the phone on the mattress beside her. The number on the plain white card. Noon on Monday, he'd said. It was Saturday morning. She had less than 48 hours, which had just collapsed to approximately 45 seconds. Alara, I can hear you in there. She picked up the backpack and put it under the bed. She did it in one motion, fast and practiced, the motion of someone who had hidden things before. Then she sat back on the edge of the mattress with her hands in her lap and her breathing even and her face arranged into whatever expression got her through doorways. She got up and opened the door. Sandra Voss looked like she'd been through a machine. Not the drinking for days worn she usually wore, but something raw. Institutional exhaustion, the specific hollowing out of someone who had been processed by a system that didn't care about them and been spat back unchanged. Her hair was flat. Her eyes were too bright, the brightness of a fever or of someone running on something more concentrated than sleep. She was wearing the same clothes she'd left in 18 days ago, which told Alara that nobody had brought her anything, that she'd been in holding clothes until she was released and had changed back into her own at the facility and walked or bussed home. Sandra looked at Alara's face for a long moment. Then she walked past her into the apartment. Alara turned and watched her. Sandra went to the kitchen, opened the cabinet where she kept the liquor, and found it the way Alara had left it. 2 inches of something generic in a plastic bottle, which was all that had been there before the arrest. Sandra looked at the 2 inches for a moment and then poured it into a glass and drank half of it standing at the counter with her back to the room. "They let you out early," Alara said. "Good behavior." Sandra's voice was flat. "Turns out if you don't talk to anyone for 18 days, they call it good behavior." "Okay." Sandra turned around. She was looking at Alara the way she sometimes looked at things she was trying to calculate the weight of. Her eyes went to the bruising, which had faded to an ugly yellow-green, the last stages. Then to the temple, where the newer one had gone through its colors and was now just a shadow. "You look terrible," Sandra said. Alara said nothing. "I've been in holding for 18 days, Sandra continued. She set the glass down. 18 days, do you understand what that's like?" "No," Alara said. "No, of course you don't." Sandra ran her hand through her lank hair. "I've got to call a lawyer. The DA wants to pursue charges, which is insane because the officer I barely touched him. Barely." She said it the way people said things they needed to believe. "I need you to go to the store. I need cigarettes, and I need actual food, because whatever they were feeding us in there was—" "Mom," Sandra stopped. Alara had said it in a tone she'd never used before. Not loud, not confrontational, just a tone that said, "I am not going to the store." Something in it stopped Sandra the way volume wouldn't have. Sandra looked at her. "What?" Sandra said. "I'm not going to the store." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, somewhere below, a car horn sounded twice and then stopped. Sandra's face did the thing it did, the slight reorganization of features, the subtle shift from one register to another. "I've been in holding for 18 days, she said again, slower this time. "I come home and my daughter tells me she's not—" "I heard you," Alara said. "I'm not going to the store." Sandra looked at her for a long moment. Something was moving behind her eyes, a calculation or a pressure or both. She picked the glass back up, drank the other half of the 2 inches, set it back down with a sound that was just slightly too loud. "I see," Sandra said. 18 days away and you've decided things are different now." "I've decided I'm not going to the store right now." "That's not what you said. You said you're not going." "Right now," Alara said. "I said not right now." It wasn't true. She had no intention of going at any point, but she had learned a long time ago that the direct collision was never the right approach, that the way through was lateral, that you bought time and space where you could and used it. She was buying time. She didn't know for what exactly, because the backpack was under the bed, and it was Saturday morning, and noon on Monday was still 36 hours away, and Sandra was standing in the kitchen with an empty glass and the bright fever eyes. "Fine," Sandra said. "Fine. I'll go myself." She picked up her purse from the counter. She'd come in with it, which meant she had money, which meant she'd gotten something from somewhere. Probably the emergency cash she kept in the lining she thought Alara didn't know about. "When I get back, we're going to talk about this attitude." She left. The front door made its coffin drag sound. Alara stood in the kitchen for 3 seconds. Then she went to her room, pulled the backpack from under the bed, checked that everything was still in it, and put it back. She picked up her phone. looked at the number on the card. She did not call. Not yet. Noon on Monday was the plan, and she needed to not deviate from the plan, because deviating from plans under pressure was how plans fell apart. She put the phone in her pocket and went back to the kitchen and stood at the window and watched the street below. Sandra came back 2 hours later with cigarettes and a bottle that was not 2 inches and not plastic. Alara heard the change in her footsteps on the stairs, the slight heaviness of the left foot that meant she'd opened it before she got home, that she'd been drinking on the bus or walking or wherever she'd been. Not far gone, just enough to turn the edge. Alara was on the couch with the library book open, not reading it. Sandra came in and didn't look at her and went to the kitchen and set the bottle on the counter and stood there with both hands on the edge of the sink, looking at nothing. "Your Aunt Carol called the building this morning," Sandra said. "The machine picked up. She knows I'm back." Alara turned a page she hadn't read. "She's been talking to someone at social services," Sandra continued. "Some caseworker. Been making calls about you." Sandra turned around. "Do you know anything about that?" "No," Alara said. "You've been in contact with her?" "I haven't." "Then why is she calling social services?" "I don't know, Mom." "Don't." Sandra's voice had picked up the edge now, the one that came from the first 2 drinks when she was already keyed up. "Don't do that voice. You have a voice you do where you go all flat and calm, and it makes me insane." Alara closed the book. "What voice do you want me to use?" "A real one. Talk to me like a real person." "I'm talking to you like a real person." "Then tell me the truth about Carol." Sandra came into the living room. She was still in the same clothes, still carrying the institutional exhaustion under the 2 drinks, and her eyes had that specific quality. Not quite rage, but the pressure that preceded it, the barometric drop before the storm proper. "Did you call her? Did you tell her something? Did you go around behind my back while I was—" "I didn't call Carol. She didn't come up with this on her own." "Then someone else told her. I don't know who. I haven't talked to Carol in months." Sandra stopped in the center of the room. She was looking at Alara with the expression Alara had cataloged under, looking for the lie. She did this, looked for the lie even when there wasn't one, maybe especially when there wasn't one, because the lie was a thing she could point to, and the absence of it left her with nothing except the thing she was actually angry about, which was never what she said it was. "There's something different about you," Sandra said. Alara said nothing. "Since I've been back." "Something's different." Sandra's eyes moved around the room, skimming surfaces, looking for something out of place. "What did you do while I was gone?" "Worked, bought groceries, kept the place up. That's all." "That's all." Sandra's eyes came back to her face. They stayed there for a long and specific moment, and Alara held herself very still and kept her face arranged and breathed slowly through her nose and did not look at the hallway that led to her room and the backpack under the bed. "Okay," Sandra said finally. She went back to the kitchen, poured 2 inches of the new bottle. "We'll talk later." Alara picked up the book. She turned pages she didn't read for the next 4 hours. That night was the longest of Alara's life up to that point. Sandra drank with the steady, methodical focus of someone who had 18 days of interrupted rhythm to correct. She didn't get loud or fast about it. She paced herself with the grim efficiency of long practice. The television went on. The channels cycled. Alara stayed in her room with the door closed and her back against the wall, and her phone face up on the mattress beside her, and tried to exist in a way that took up no space, no sound, no air. She thought about the backpack, about noon on Monday, about 32 hours that felt like trying to walk a wire in a high wind. She thought about what he'd said, sitting on the front steps. When she gets out, she's going to be angrier than when she went in. He hadn't known she was getting out 2 days early. Neither had Alara. She ran the math again. If she called him now, tonight, what did that change? He'd said noon on Monday. If she asked him to move it up, to tomorrow, to tonight even, would he? She didn't know. She barely knew anything about how he operated, despite the conversations, despite the front steps. She had the number. She had the yes she'd already given. She did not have a sense of what flexibility looked like from his end. She picked up the phone, set it back down, picked it up again, and heard, from the other room, Sandra's recliner creak. Then footsteps. Not toward her room, toward the kitchen. More liquor. The clink of the bottle. Then the footsteps came back, stopped outside her door. "I talked to someone at the facility," Sandra said through the door. Her voice had the middle-of-the-bottle quality now. A counselor. They said something about... They said sometimes when there's been conflict in a household, both people need to... She stopped. There was a long pause in which Alara could hear her breathing, slightly elevated, slightly ragged. They said there were resources. Alara stared at the door. Okay, she said carefully. I'm just telling you what they said. Sandra's voice had gone careful, too, in a different way. The carefulness of someone navigating something they didn't have language for and were afraid of what the wrong words would do. They said there were resources, classes or something. I wrote down a number. Alara sat completely still. Mom, she said, I'm not saying anything. I'm telling you what they said. Okay. You don't have to say anything about it. Okay. A very long pause. I wasn't trying to... Sandra stopped again. There was a sound that might have been her hand against the door, a palm laid flat against the wood. I know things haven't been... I know it's been hard. The words were so unlike anything Sandra Voss had ever said in that hallway, that Alara felt something move through her that she couldn't immediately identify. Not hope. She had learned too young what hope cost. But something in the same family, something that hurt in the same specific place. I know, Alara said. A pause. Then Sandra's footsteps moved back to the recliner. The television volume went up. Alara sat with the phone in her hand for a long time. She thought, she said that, she said those words. And something in the young and much damaged part of her wanted to take them and build something out of them, a reason to reconsider, a reason to believe that the facility had done something, that the 18 days had been something other than interrupted momentum, that the counselor and the classes and the I know it's been hard were the beginning of a different version. She thought that for a while. Then she thought about the outer edge of the range. She thought about the backpack under the bed. She thought about noon on Monday. She put the phone down and lay on her back and stared at the ceiling and did not let herself build anything out of those 3 sentences. Because building things out of 3 sentences in this apartment was not hope. It was a different thing that wore Hope's face. She slept fitfully. She woke before dawn. Sandra was still in the recliner, asleep from the sound of her breathing. The television had cycled to an infomercial for something, the bright, insistent voice of it filling the apartment. Alara lay still and listened to her mother sleep and counted the hours. 22 hours to noon on Monday. She could do 22 hours. She stayed in bed until she heard Sandra wake. The particular sequence of sounds, the sharp intake of breath, the recliner creaking, the slow and pained movement of someone whose body had been sleeping in a chair and was informing her of that decision at length. Then shuffling to the bathroom, running water. Alara got up. She went to the kitchen. She made coffee, the cheap kind, the grocery store brand, and had a cup standing at the counter and was rinsing it when Sandra came into the kitchen. Sandra looked at her. In the morning light, without the drinks, and with the sleep, and the long days of enforced sobriety in the facility still visible somewhere underneath the puffiness and the exhaustion, Sandra looked briefly, painfully, terribly like a person. Like the person Alara carried somewhere very deep and very locked away. The one from the before time, the one from the photographs that didn't exist anywhere anymore. Sandra poured herself coffee. I need to tell you something, Sandra said. Alara turned around. Her hand was still on the edge of the sink. Sandra was looking at the coffee cup. While I was in there, one of the women, she was older, she'd been in and out a lot, she told me something. Sandra's voice had the deliberate evenness of someone who'd been rehearsing. She said the way you know you have a real problem is when the people you love start making plans to leave and you're the last one to find out. The kitchen was very quiet. She wasn't talking about me specifically, Sandra continued. She was talking about herself, but I kept thinking about it. She finally looked up. Her eyes were red around the edges, not from crying, just from fatigue and drink and all the years of them. Are you making plans to leave? The direct question hit Alara in the chest like something thrown. She stood at the sink with the water still running faintly behind her and looked at her mother's face. This terrible, familiar, ruined face that she had loved and feared in equal measure for every year of her life. And she thought about what to say. She thought about the backpack. She thought about noon on Monday. She thought about, are you making plans to leave? Mom? And then Sandra's phone buzzed on the counter. Sandra glanced at it. Her face changed. She picked it up, read something. And the thing that happened to her expression was immediate and total, like a current being cut. All the careful evenness dropping away at once, replaced by something colder and more familiar. Who is Dante Moretti? Sandra said. The floor dropped out. Alara's hands gripped the sink. What? She said. The word came out wrong, too small, too thin. Sandra turned the phone around. On the screen was a text message from a number Alara didn't recognize. It was short. It read, "Your daughter has been in contact with Dante Moretti. Do you know who that is? Ask her." Sandra's eyes were on Alara's face with the specific, terrible focus of someone who has just been handed the thing they were looking for and found it more solid than they expected. "Who is he?" Sandra said again. "I don't." "Don't." Sandra set the phone on the counter face up. "Don't you dare do the flat voice right now. Who is Dante Moretti, and why does someone think I need to know you've been in contact with him?" Alara's mind was moving very fast across a surface that had no grip. Someone had sent that text. Someone who knew his name and knew her name and had Sandra's number and had sent it at this specific moment, this exact morning, 21 hours before noon on Monday. Someone had done that deliberately. "He lives across the street," Alara said, because it was the closest to true she could get without the ground collapsing entirely. "I've talked to him a couple of times. Across the street." Sandra looked at the phone, looked at her. "Someone texts me to warn me about a man across the street that my daughter has been talking to a couple of times." The disbelief was audible, laced with something sharper. "Who is he?" "I don't know exactly. Alara. He told me he—" She stopped, thought about how to land this. "He said he knew people in the neighborhood, that he watched out for—" "He's a criminal," Sandra said. Her voice had gone very quiet, the worst kind of quiet. "Dante Moretti. I know that name. I've heard that name." She pressed 2 fingers against her temple. "He runs the docks. The Moretti family runs everything on the Northeast docks, has for 20 years, and my daughter has been—" She stopped, looked at the phone again, back at Alara. "What did he want from you?" "Nothing. He was just—" "What did he want?" The kitchen felt smaller than it had ever been. Alara's hands were still on the sink, and she could feel the cold water running against the drain, and she thought about 21 hours, and she thought about, what did he want? And she thought about the backpack under the bed, and the yes she'd already said, and she looked at her mother's face and saw the storm forming behind it. Not the normal storm, something worse, something that had been compressed and stored for 18 days of good behavior and had just been handed an outlet. "He offered to help me," Alara said. Sandra stared at her. "Help you?" Sandra repeated. "Yes." "Help you what?" Alara looked at her mother's face and made a decision that was not a decision so much as an arrival. The thing she'd been approaching for years, the moment she'd been working toward without fully knowing it. And she said, "Get out." The word detonated in the kitchen. Sandra's face went through several things in rapid succession. Shock was first, genuine and unguarded. Then something wounded, something raw. And then the storm came in, fully formed, complete. The one that had been building for 18 days and had found its surface at— The word hung in the kitchen air like smoke. "Get out." Sandra's face had gone through shock and wound, and now it was somewhere past both of those, somewhere that didn't have a clean name. The storm was in her eyes, fully formed, and her hands were flat on the counter, and her breathing had changed, faster, shallower, the specific rhythm Alara had cataloged under. "This is happening now. Get out," Sandra repeated. She said it back like she was testing the weight of it. "He offered to help you get out." "Yes." "Of what?" Alara looked at her mother's face and said nothing, because the answer to that question was everything in this room and everything it contained, and the woman standing in it, and saying that out loud was not a thing she had the language for. Not right now. Not in this kitchen with the current still cut and the storm already present. Sandra understood anyway. The understanding moved through her face like weather. "You were going to leave," Sandra said. Her voice had dropped to something almost quiet. Almost. "You packed a bag. You have a bag somewhere in this apartment. Mom, where is it?" not a question. The other thing. Listen to me. Where is the bag, Alara? She moved. Not toward the hallway, not yet. She moved toward Alara first, closing the distance across the kitchen in 3 steps, and Alara stepped back and her hip caught the edge of the counter hard enough to send pain flaring up her side. And Sandra was right there, in her face, close enough that Alara could smell the old alcohol and the institutional soap, and underneath both of them, something that was just her mother, just the smell of her, which she had known her entire life. There is no bag, Alara said. Sandra's hand moved. Alara caught her wrist. She had never done that before. The shock of it stopped them both. Sandra's wrist in Alara's grip, Alara's fingers wrapped around the thin bone of it, and both of them frozen in the kitchen by the sheer unexpectedness of it, the deviation from every version of this scene they had ever played. Sandra looked at Alara's hand on her wrist, looked at her face. "Let go of me," Sandra said. Alara let go. She stepped back. Her hip was still radiating pain from the counter edge, and her heart was hitting her ribs so hard she could feel it in her jaw. And she was breathing through her nose in careful, controlled increments, because breathing was the thing she could control when nothing else was. "I'm not going to fight you," Alara said. Her voice was shaking slightly. Not from fear, from the effort of keeping it level when everything underneath it was not level, was not anywhere near level. "I'm not going to do this. Not anymore." Sandra stared at her. "I love you?" Alara said, and meant it, which was the worst and most complicated part of all of it, the part that had made leaving impossible for so many years, the knot at the center of everything. "I have always loved you, and I cannot stay here." The storm in Sandra's eyes broke into something else, something fractured and terrible. "He got to you," Sandra said. Her voice was cracking at the edges. "That man, this Moretti, this isn't about him. You were fine before." "I was never fine." Alara's voice came out harder than she intended, the control slipping slightly. "I was surviving. That's not the same thing. Mom, look at my face. Look at it." Sandra looked. The yellowed bruise along the jaw, the faded shadow at the temple, the accumulated geography of years. "That's you," Alara said. "That's yours. You did that." Sandra's face contracted. "You don't understand what I've been through." "I understand exactly what you've been through," Alara said. "I've been through it with you every day, every night. For 19 years I have been through it with you, and I cannot—" She stopped, pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for 1 second, then dropped it. "I cannot do it anymore." Sandra looked at her for a long moment, then she walked past her toward the hallway. Alara turned, watched her go. Sandra went to Alara's room. Door open, she knew. She'd known from the word "get out." And Alara heard her moving around in there and did not follow, because following was always wrong. Following was always more surface. And she stood in the kitchen and breathed and listened to the sounds of her mother finding the backpack under the bed. The silence after that was short. Then Sandra came back to the kitchen doorway, holding the backpack by one strap. The photograph was visible in the front pocket, the corner of it, the yellow sweater edge. Sandra looked at the bag for a long time. Her hand was shaking. "You packed this before I got home," she said. "You packed this yesterday." "Yes." "You were going to leave without— You weren't going to tell me." Alara said nothing. "You were just going to be gone." Sandra's voice had lost its storm edge, and what was underneath was raw, and in some ways harder to look at. "I would have come home Monday, and you'd just be—" "Yes," Alara said. The word landed. Sandra set the backpack down on the kitchen floor. She looked at it. She looked at her daughter. Something was moving through her face that Alara couldn't fully read, which was unusual. She had spent 19 years learning to read that face with the specificity of survival. Then Sandra picked up her phone from the counter. "I'm going to call him," Sandra said. "Don't." "I'm going to call Dante Moretti, and I'm going to tell him to stay away from my daughter." "Mom, stop. He has no right to come to this neighborhood and put ideas into—" "He didn't put ideas into anything." Alara's voice broke open slightly. "The ideas were already there. The ideas were always there. He just—" She stopped, breathed. "He just offered a door." Sandra was already dialing. Not his number. She didn't have his number. She was calling someone else, and Alara watched her and felt the situation slipping past her at speed. The 21 hours compressing, the plan she'd been holding intact for 6 days starting to come apart along its seams. "Who are you calling?" Alara said. Sandra didn't answer. She put the phone to her ear. Alara crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and took the phone out of her mother's hand. The second time in 60 seconds, she'd done something she'd never done before. Her hands were steady this time. She looked at the screen. The number Sandra had been calling was unfamiliar. Not Carol, not any number she recognized. "Who is this?" Alara said. Sandra looked at her with an expression that had gone suddenly, carefully blank. The specific blankness of someone caught. Something cold moved through Alara's chest. "Mom." Her voice had changed. Something underneath had hardened. "Who were you calling? Give me my phone. Who is this number?" "It's none of—" "Someone texted you this morning," Alara said. The pieces were arriving in order now, cold and sequential. "Someone texted you about Dante, someone who knew his name and knew my name and had your number." She held up the phone. "Is this them?" Sandra's blank expression held for 2 more seconds. Then it fractured. "I was trying to protect you," Sandra said. The kitchen tilted. "What did you do?" Alara said. Alara, you have to understand. A man like that, someone like Moretti, you don't understand what he is, what his people are." "What did you do?" Sandra pressed her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were wet now, which was a thing Alara had almost never seen, the specific rarity of it making it worse somehow, making it more alarming rather than less. "When I was in holding," Sandra said through her hand, "there was a woman. She'd heard your name. I don't know how. People talk, the officers, I don't know. And she told me she knew Moretti, that she had contacts who watched his movements." Sandra's hand dropped. "She said he'd been seen near our building. She said she could find out why. I gave her your name to help narrow down—" "You gave her my name," Alara said, "to help find out what he wanted. You gave a stranger my name while you were in a holding facility." The words came out of Alara's mouth with a flatness that scared her. "And this morning, that stranger texted you to tell you what she'd found out. Because it was useful to her, because she wanted you to—" She stopped. "Mom, who is this woman?" "I don't know exactly. She said she worked for people who had a problem with Moretti, people who watched his—" "She works for someone who has a problem with Dante Moretti," Alara said. The cold in her chest had spread, was moving down her arms. "And you handed her my name. And she texted you this morning, right now, 18 hours before I was supposed to—" She cut herself off. Sandra looked at her daughter's face and seemed to fully understand for the first time the specific shape of what she'd done. "Alara." Alara was already moving. She picked up the backpack from the kitchen floor, slung it over one shoulder, picked her phone up from the counter. "You can't leave," Sandra said. "You can't go to him. Not now, if someone's watching." "You made it dangerous," Alara said. Her voice was very quiet. "You made it dangerous by handing my name to a stranger who works for people who are watching him. Do you understand that? Whatever was safe about this, you made it not safe." "I was trying to—" "Stop saying that." Alara looked at her mother. She was shaking, she realized. Her hands, her jaw, the fine tremor of something that had been compressed for too long releasing all at once. "You were trying to keep me here. That's what you were trying to do. The same thing you have always been trying to do, just a different method." Sandra's face crumpled. "You're all I have," Sandra said. The 3 words hit Alara in the chest like a fist. She stood in the kitchen doorway with the backpack on her shoulder and her phone in her hand and her mother's face in front of her, crumpled, wet, terrible, beloved. And she felt the knot at the center of everything pull tight one final time, the one that had kept her here through all of it, the one that had been woven out of love and fear and obligation and the specific torment of being someone's only person when that someone was destroying you. "I know," Alara said. She walked out. She was on the stairwell when she called him. It rang once. He picked up. "Something's wrong," she said. She was moving down the stairs fast, hand on the railing, her sneakers loud on the concrete steps. "Someone your people have a problem with. Someone warned my mother about you this morning. She gave them my name while she was in holding." A short silence. "How long ago?" "The text came maybe 20 minutes ago," maybe less. Where are you now? Stairwell. I'm leaving. Don't go out the front, he said. His voice had changed. The unhurried quality was still there, but underneath it something had sharpened, something operational. Is there a back exit, service entrance, alley access, anything? There's a door at the back of the first floor. Comes out on the alley between my building and the next one. Use it. Turn left out of the alley, walk to the corner of Rector and Vine, stay on the building side of the sidewalk. I'll be there in 8 minutes. 8 minutes? 7 now. Keep moving. She kept moving. Ground floor. The back hallway smelled like mildew and old pipes, the specific underground smell of a building's least tended spaces. The back door had a push bar that screamed when she hit it, the sound of it enormous in the quiet alley. Cold air hit her face like a flat hand. She turned left. The alley was narrow and ran between 2 buildings, dumpsters on one side, a chain-link fence on the other with a yellow plastic bag caught in it, rippling in the wind. She moved through it fast, not running. Running was wrong. Running was visible. Running told anyone watching exactly where to look. She moved the way she'd learned to move through rooms that might be dangerous, purposeful, head slightly down, pace even. The end of the alley opened onto a side street that fed into Rector. She reached the corner of Rector and Vine in under 4 minutes. She stopped at the building line and waited. The street was Sunday morning quiet, a man walking a dog on the opposite side, 2 women at a bus stop half a block down, a delivery truck idling near the intersection, hazards blinking. Alara stood at the building line with her backpack on her shoulder and her heart doing its irregular thing, and her eyes moving across the street in the pattern she'd learned in that apartment, locate the variables, assess the weight of them, identify the exits. She clocked the car on the second pass, not the black sedan. A gray one, parked half a block east on Rector, engine running, 2 shapes in the front seat not moving, her pulse spiked. She looked away from it slowly, the way you looked away from things you'd seen, giving nothing back to whoever might be watching her watch them. Her phone buzzed, a text from him. 2 minutes, don't move. She looked at the message, looked at the gray car, looked at the corner. 1 minute passed. Then the black sedan came around the corner from Vine at a pace that was unhurried and absolute. The car of someone who had decided on a direction and was not reconsidering it. It pulled to the building line where she was standing and the passenger door opened from inside. She got in. The door closed. Dante was in the driver's seat. He looked at her face first. The bruising, the expression, all of it. And then his eyes moved to the rearview mirror. His jaw was tight. Whatever the operational version of him was, it was fully present now. The composed surface still there, but thinner, pulled taut over something more alert underneath. Gray car. Half block east, Alara said. I saw it. He pulled away from the curb. Not fast. Controlled. The speed of someone not advertising urgency. 2 men. They were parked when I turned the corner, which means they were already positioned. He checked the mirror again. They'll follow. Okay. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. She put them flat on her thighs. Who are they? Probably Caruso's people. He said it the way he said most things. Plain, no decoration. Vincent Caruso. He runs freight operations in the South Port, which is mine by right, and has been for 12 years. He's been looking for leverage for 8 months. A pause. Your mother gave them a thread. She didn't know what she was doing. No, she didn't. He checked the mirror. They're behind us. Alara looked in the side mirror. The gray car was 2 vehicles back, making the same turns. Where are we going? She said. Somewhere they can't follow. He took a right without signaling. There are 3 of my people 2 blocks north. When we reach them, the situation changes. She looked at his profile, the tightness in his jaw, the hands on the wheel, controlled, not gripping, the specific hold of someone for whom this was a known terrain, even if the specific instance of it was new. You didn't tell me this had enemies, she said. Everything has enemies. That's not an answer. He looked at her sideways briefly. No, I didn't tell you the specifics, because the specifics weren't supposed to be relevant to you. His eyes went back to the road. That changed this morning. Because of my mother. Because of your mother. She sat with that. The gray car was still 2 vehicles back, At the next intersection, Dante ran a yellow that was almost red, and the gray car accelerated to follow and ran it fully red, and a horn sounded from the cross street, and Ilara's hands pressed hard into her thighs. "Hold on," Dante said. He turned hard left into a narrow street that the GPS on any tourist phone would have told you was one way. Not for him, apparently. He accelerated through it and came out on the other end onto a wide cross street and took an immediate right into a parking structure, going up the ramp fast, tires squealing on the polished concrete of the turns. Ilara gripped the door handle. 3rd level. He pulled hard into a spot near the stairwell and killed the engine and the lights in the same motion. They sat in the dark of the parking structure, both of them breathing, the engine ticking as it cooled. "Did we lose them?" she said. "For now." He was already on his phone typing something. "My people are repositioning. 5 minutes." She sat in the dark and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the pattern she used when she needed her body to believe things were under control before her mind had confirmed it. "The woman in the holding facility," she said. "The one who approached my mother. She knew you'd been watching my building. She knew my name. She had that fast." She looked at him. "How?" Dante finished typing. He set the phone on the console, looked at the windshield. "Someone in my own operation told Caruso's people I'd been watching your building," he said. The words came out flat and deliberate, the words of someone who had already arrived at a conclusion they didn't like. Ilara stared at his profile. "You have a leak." "Had," he said. "I dealt with it this morning, before I knew the full scope of what they already had." His jaw tightened. "They got the information before I found the source, which means they've known about you for at least 4 days. She sat with the weight of that. 4 days. She'd made the call to say yes on Friday morning. If Caruso's people had known about her for 4 days, they'd known before she made the call, which meant they'd known when she was still deciding, which meant, "They let me make the call," she said. "They waited. They wanted me to commit to leaving before they told my mother, because that's more leverage than if I'd stayed." She looked at him. "They wanted her to stop me. Or they wanted me out in the open, moving, exposed." Dante looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said. "Which is it?" "Both." He picked up the phone again. "You are leverage. Specifically, your leverage against me, which requires you to be associated with me, which required you to leave with me." He said it without apology or softening. "They accelerated your departure, made it messy, made it visible." His eyes came back to her face. "I'm sorry. This was not the plan." "What was the plan?" "Clean, quiet, no trail. Monday noon, different route, 3 hours, and you're somewhere that has no connection to me or anything around me." The corner of his mouth tightened. "That plan is gone." Outside the parking structure, somewhere below, she could hear a car moving through the structure's lower levels, moving slowly, looking. They both heard it. Dante's hand moved to the inside of his coat. Ilara watched that movement and understood precisely what it meant, and felt something shift in her own chest. The last rearrangement of something she'd been telling herself about the nature of the situation. The last comfortable distance between knowing abstractly what he was and being in a parking structure in the dark, with the sound of people looking for them on the level below. "Tell me what you need me to do," she said. He looked at her. "Can you run?" he said. She thought about her shoulder, about the hip from the counter edge this morning, about the years of moving through rooms quietly and the specific different requirement of moving through a parking structure fast. "Yes," she said. He nodded, checked the phone. "My people are on the east side of the structure, level 3, stairwell B. That's 30 meters from where we're sitting." He looked at the rearview mirror. The car on the level below was still moving, slow and deliberate. "When I say go, we go straight to the stairwell. Don't stop. Don't look back." "Okay." "Whatever happens behind us is not your concern." She looked at the inside of his coat. "And if something happens in front of us?" His eyes met hers. "Then stay behind me," he said. The car below had stopped moving. The silence it left was the kind that had weight. Dante opened his door without sound, the practiced, precise movement of someone who'd done this before, had done versions of it many times, in many structures, and had learned exactly how much force to use and where. He looked at her across the console. "Now," he said. They moved. Out of the car and across the concrete in the half-dark of the structure's fluorescent lighting, which was the particular institutional yellow of places that weren't meant to be lived in. Her sneakers were quiet. His were quieter. 30 meters to the stairwell door, and she was counting them without meaning to. 19, 18, the way she counted steps in the hallway at home. The way her body had made a counter out of everything without her permission. Behind them, from the ramp that led up from the level below, came the sound of a car engine. Dante's hand went to her arm. Not grabbing, not pulling, just a brief pressure that said, faster. She went faster. The stairwell door was gray metal with a push bar and a small wire glass window. She hit the push bar and it opened, and they went through and the door closed behind them, and the stairwell was concrete and cold, and her breath was loud in it. From the other side of the door, almost immediately, came the sound of a car door. Then voices. 2 of them, not loud. The professional quiet of men who had done this before and knew that quiet was faster than noise. Dante was already on his phone, typing with one hand, his other hand still on the inside of his coat. He looked at the phone, looked at the stairwell above them. Up, he said. 1 floor. She went up. He was right behind her, his footsteps on the concrete stairs deliberate and even, not hurried. She could hear her own breathing in the stairwell, couldn't slow it, didn't try. 4th level. The door there opened onto the parking structure and the cold air hit her again, and she came out into the gray Sunday morning light filtering through the open sides of the structure and saw, parked 20 feet away, a black SUV with 2 men standing beside it. They looked at Dante. He nodded. One of them opened the rear door of the SUV. Dante looked at Alara. "Get in," he said. She looked at the SUV, at the 2 men who were looking at her with the neutral professional attention of people who were paid to be present and had no opinion about the specifics. She looked at Dante's face. Below them, in the stairwell they'd just come from, she heard the door from level 3 open. She got in the SUV. Dante got in beside her. The door closed. The 2 men got in front. The SUV moved immediately, out of the spot and toward the exit ramp, and from the corner of her window, Alara caught a glimpse, brief, partial, of 2 men coming through the stairwell door onto level 4, stopping when they saw the SUV moving, one of them raising a phone to his ear. Then the ramp curved, and they were gone. She sat back against the seat and pressed her hands flat on her thighs again, and breathed. "Where are we going?" she said. "Somewhere safe," Dante said. "You said that before. And I meant it before." He was on the phone again. "It's more complicated now." "How much more complicated?" He lowered the phone slightly. His face in the gray light coming through the SUV windows was set and angular, and she could see the muscle working in his jaw, the only tell in an otherwise controlled surface. "Caruso knows you're with me," he said, "which means he's going to try to use that. He's going to make a move, probably in the next few hours, while the situation is still fluid." He looked at her. "Which means the next few hours are going to be the hardest part." "Harder than the parking structure?" "Yes." She looked at him. "Why?" she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Something moved through it that she couldn't fully name. Not apology, but the closest thing to it that his face seemed capable of producing. "Because Caruso's move isn't going to be against me directly," he said. "Not yet. He's not ready for a direct move. What he's going to do is—" He stopped. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. His expression changed. It changed in a way she had never seen his expression change across all the conversations and doorways and front steps. All the composed and deliberate surfaces he'd shown her. This was something underneath all of that. Something that had been reached. He said one word to the phone, short and clipped, and ended the call. "What?" Alara said. He looked at her. "Your mother," he said. "Caruso's people went back to your building." The word hit her like the counter edge had hit her hip that morning. Sudden, specific, radiating. Her mother. "What do you mean they went back?" Alara said. Dante was already talking to the driver, low and fast, and the SUV accelerated through the Sunday quiet street with the smooth authority of something that had been pointed in a direction and released. She grabbed his arm. "What do you mean they went back to my building?" He looked at her. His face had that reached quality still, the something underneath showing through. "My contact says 2 of Caruso's men went back to the building after we left the structure. They're inside." Sandra's inside. Yes. They went in after Sandra. Yes. She let go of his arm. She looked at the windshield, at the city moving past it, at the gray November sky above the buildings. Her hands were in her lap and she could feel her pulse in both of them, hard and fast and insistent. She's leverage, Alar said. Her own voice sounded strange to her, flat and precise, the voice she used when she was so far past feeling that only the mechanics were left. You said I was leverage against you, but they can't use me if I'm already with you, so they took her instead. Dante said nothing, which was its own answer. Turn around, she said. Alara, turn the car around. She looked at him. She doesn't know anything. She doesn't know where we're going. She doesn't know what you operate. She doesn't know anything that's useful to them. They're going to figure that out in about 10 minutes, and then whatever they do to her to make sure they haven't missed anything is going to... She stopped, breathed. Turn the car around. Going back to that building is exactly what they want us to do. I know. They'll have the front covered, possibly the back. Walking back in there. I know. She held his gaze. She's my mother. The word sat between them. The same word he'd heard in a different form, years ago, in a different apartment, in a different city, when someone should have turned a car around for him and nobody did. She didn't know that, not the specifics, but she saw something in his face shift, a weight being recognized, a familiar shape in unfamiliar circumstances. He looked at the driver. Rector Street, he said. Bring Marcus and Yev. They parked 2 blocks north, out of sight line of the building's entrance. Dante's 2 men, Marcus, who was wide through the chest and moved like someone who had calculated the weight of every room he'd ever entered, and Yev, who was shorter and quicker and looked at everything with the specific attention of someone who cataloged variables professionally, came out of the SUV, and the 3 of them stood on the sidewalk in the cold and talked in low-fast sentences that Alar was not included in. She stood beside the SUV and looked at the 2 blocks between her and her building and thought about her mother standing in the kitchen doorway holding a backpack, crumpled and wet-eyed, saying, "You're all I have." She thought about Sandra on the phone at 6 this morning with a woman she'd met in a holding facility, trying to gather information, trying to build something she could use, convinced as she had always been convinced that control was the same thing as safety, and that keeping Alara here was the same thing as keeping her close. She thought about 18 years of that. She thought about 2 men from Caruso's operation inside those walls right now. Dante turned to her. Here's what's going to happen. Marcus goes in through the back, same way you came out. Yev takes the east side of the street, eyes on the front. I go in through the front with you. With me. They saw you leave with me. If you walk back in, they hesitate. They're not sure what it means, whether it's a trade, whether you're coming back voluntarily. It buys Marcus 30 seconds from the back. He looked at her steadily. Can you walk through that door like you're not afraid? She almost laughed. I've been walking through that door like I'm not afraid for 19 years. Something moved through his face. Not quite a smile. The thing that lived in the same neighborhood. Okay, he said. The front door made its cough and drag when she pushed it open. She went in first, Dante 2 steps behind and to her right, and the lobby, if you could call it that, the small tiled vestibule with the broken mailbox panel and the single overhead light that buzzed, was empty. The stairs ahead of them. The elevator that hadn't worked since she was 14. She took the stairs. Her body was doing the thing it did under certain conditions, narrowing, sharpening, all the background noise of thought and feeling compressing down to the immediate and the physical. 2nd floor landing. 3rd, the carpet smell. The sound of a television from somewhere, muffled. 4th floor. Her floor. She came around the last turn of the stairwell and stopped. The door to her apartment was open. Not all the way. Ajar, 6 inches, the way a door looked when someone had gone through it without caring whether it closed behind them. From inside came the sound of movement. One voice, low, not Sandra's. Dante's hand was on her shoulder barely. A pressure, she understood it. Slow down. She slowed. They reached the door. She pushed it open. The living room had been gone through. Not ransacked, not the theatrical violence of movies, but the practical disruption of people looking for something specific. couch cushions displaced. Sandra's side table overturned. The telephone cord pulled from the wall. Sandra was on the couch. She was upright, which was the first thing Ilara catalogued, and conscious, which was the second. There was a man standing near the window and another one near the hallway entrance, and both of them were looking at the door, at Ilara, with the assessing attention of professionals who had been told a situation might change and had been waiting for it to change. Sandra looked at her daughter. Her face did something complicated and quiet that Ilara didn't have room to process right now. She doesn't know anything, Ilara said to the room. Direct. No preamble. You can see that. Whatever you're looking for from her, she doesn't have it. The man near the window was the one who'd speak for them, she could tell. The way he held his weight, the economy of his attention. He looked past Ilara at Dante. Mr. Moretti, he said. The courtesy in it was the thin professional kind, the kind that meant nothing. Ray, Dante said. He knew the man's name. Of course he knew the man's name. This is unnecessary. Mr. Caruso disagrees. Mr. Caruso is making a move with a bad hand because he thinks the situation is fluid enough to cover the smell of it. Dante stepped into the room, past Ilara, moving to the center of it with the deliberate ease of someone who is claiming space rather than entering it. The woman on the couch has nothing. You know that. You've been here long enough to know that. Ray's eyes moved to Sandra, back to Dante. The girl's the asset, Ray said. The girl is standing right here, Ilara said. Ray looked at her with the flat attention of someone recalibrating. She's not an asset, Dante said. She's not a piece. Whatever Caruso told you about what this is, he was wrong. This is a personal matter that has nothing to do with the docks, the freight, or whatever play he's running. And right now you're standing in a civilian apartment, which creates a specific set of problems for you that Caruso is not going to help you with after the fact. Something moved through Ray's face. A calculation. He was running the numbers on what he'd been sent to do against what he was actually looking at, and what the downstream costs of those two things were. And the numbers were not coming out the way he'd expected. I need to make a call, Ray said. Make it outside, Dante said. A pause. Ray looked at the second man, something passing between them wordlessly, the shorthand of people who worked together. Then Ray moved toward the door, phone already in his hand. The second man stayed. The second man was looking at Ilara with a specific quality of attention that she recognized from years of reading rooms. It was the attention of someone who had decided something, or was about to, and was waiting for the moment to act on it. His weight was slightly forward. His hands were loose at his sides in the particular way that loose at the sides meant ready. Dante had seen it too. She could tell by the way his position had shifted, barely a centimeter. But she had been reading rooms for 19 years and she read his. From behind her, from the hallway, came the sound of the apartment's back window being opened. Marcus. The second man's attention broke. Half a second, a flicker toward the hallway. And in that half second, Dante moved, closing the distance between them with a speed and directness that was startling, not because it was violent, but because it was so without hesitation, so completely committed. 2 steps, and his hand on the man's collar, and a turn that used the man's own forward weight against him. And then Marcus was in the room from the hallway, and it was over before it had fully started. The second man on the floor. Marcus's knee in his back. The man not fighting it because the calculation had been run, and the outcome was clear. From outside in the hall, Ray's voice on the phone, the words indistinct. Dante looked at Ilara. She was standing in the center of the room, and she was looking at her mother. Sandra was on the couch. She had not made a sound through any of it. She was looking at her daughter with the specific expression of someone who had spent the last 20 minutes being afraid and was only now beginning to feel what kind of afraid it had been. Her hands were in her lap. She was shaking slightly, not dramatically, just a fine tremor in her fingers. Ilara crossed the room and crouched in front of her. "Are you hurt?" Ilara said. Sandra shook her head. "Did they touch you?" "No." Sandra's voice was thin. They kept asking me questions. About you. About him." She looked past Ilara at Dante. "About what you'd told me. Where you were going. What did you tell them?" Sandra looked at her daughter's face. "Nothing. I didn't know anything." A pause. That's the first time not knowing something felt like the right answer. Ilara looked at her mother's face for a long moment. Outside in the hallway, Ray's phone call ended. He came back into the room, stopped when he saw his colleague on the floor, did the recalculation fast. He looked at Dante. "We're done here," Ray said. "Yes," Dante said. "You are." Ray looked at Alara. Something passed through his expression that might have been the closest thing to discomfort a professional like him allowed himself. Then he and Marcus between them arranged the transfer of the second man, and they left, and the broken apartment was quiet. Yev came up from the street 10 minutes later to report the gray car was gone. Dante made calls in the kitchen, low and methodical, while Marcus stood near the front door and Alara sat on the couch beside her mother, and neither of them said anything for a while. The television was still off. The side table was still overturned. The phone cord was still pulled from the wall. After a while, Sandra said, "He's going to deal with the Caruso situation." "Yes. That's what the calls are." "I think so." Sandra looked at her hands. "What does that mean? Deal with it." "I don't know the specifics." "But you know the general." Alara looked at the overturned table. "Yes." Sandra was quiet for another moment. "I put you in danger," she said, "this morning, with the phone call, with the woman in the facility. I thought I was—" She stopped. "I keep thinking I'm protecting you. I keep doing things because I think they're protection, and they turn out to be—" She pressed her hand flat against her own sternum. "I had 2 men in my apartment asking me questions about my daughter, and I didn't know a single answer. Do you know what that felt like? Mom, not knowing where you were, whether you were safe, whether what I'd done had—" Sandra's voice broke slightly. She steadied it. "I need you to know that I know. What I've done. All of it. The whole of it." She looked at Alara directly, and her eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted and more present than Alara could remember seeing them in years. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to stay. I just need you to know that I know." Alara sat with that. The clock on the kitchen wall, the one with the cracked face that had always run 3 minutes fast, ticked in the quiet. "I know you know," Alara said finally. "You've always known. That's the part that—" She stopped, looked at her hands. "That's the part I had to stop waiting for. I kept thinking that when you finally knew, really knew, it would change something. But knowing and changing are different things." Sandra looked at her. "I know that too," Sandra said quietly. "I can't stay here and wait to see which way it goes for you," Alara said. "I can't do that anymore. I used up everything I had waiting." "I know. I'm going to go." "I know." Alara looked at her mother's face, the ruin of it, the familiar architecture underneath the ruin, the face she'd been reading her entire life, the one she'd loved before she understood what love cost in that apartment. "The counselor at the facility," Alara said. "The number she gave you." Sandra looked at her hands. "I wrote it down." "Call it," Alara said. "Not for me. I'm not going to be here to see whether you call it or what happens if you do. Call it because the alternative is what this morning was." She paused. "Because you're not nobody, Mom. You're just someone who's been losing a fight for a long time and keeps picking the same weapon." Sandra's jaw tightened. She didn't speak. "I'm going to go now," Alara said. She stood up. She picked up the backpack from the floor where she'd dropped it when she came through the door. She put it on her shoulder. She stood over her mother and looked at her for the last time in this apartment, in this particular version of everything, and something in her chest did the thing she'd been afraid it would do. Cracked along a line she hadn't known was there, quiet and complete. The sound of something that had been held together by pressure finally releasing. She leaned down and pressed her mouth to the top of her mother's head. Sandra's hand came up and gripped her wrist. Not hard, not the grip of restraint, just the grip of contact, of someone holding something they knew was leaving. Alara stood up. She walked to the door. She did not look back. The safe house was in a neighborhood 3 boroughs removed from everything she knew. A 3rd-floor apartment in a building that was ordinary in every visible way, the kind of ordinary that cost careful thought to achieve, clean, functional, a window that looked out onto a side street with a tree that had lost most of its leaves, a bed with a frame, a kitchen with actual pots in it. Dante showed her through it without ceremony, opening doors and noting things, the locks, the fire escape, the buzzer system. in the factual tone he used for information that was useful rather than impressive. He wasn't performing the space. He was just telling her what it was. When he'd finished, he stood near the door with his coat still on and his hands in his pockets and looked at her. "The lawyer will contact you Monday," he said. "She'll walk you through the documents. All of it takes about 2 weeks once she starts." He paused. "The community college contact. Her name is Dr. Fontaine. She works in adult continuing education. She knows the general situation, not the specifics. She'll help you figure out what the path looks like." Alara was standing at the window looking out at the tree. "Caruso," she said, "will not be a problem after today." "What does that mean?" "It means he overplayed a bad hand, and the people he answers to are going to find out he used civilian leverage in a personal dispute that had nothing to do with the business reason he gave them." Dante's voice was even. "That has consequences in my world that I don't need to create myself." She turned from the window. "And the person in your operation, the leak?" "Handled," he said. "Just that." She looked at him. She thought about asking what handled meant, and decided she was going to have to make a decision about which questions she asked and which ones she didn't, and that was its own kind of education. "You're going to leave now," she said. "Yes." "And the thing you said, about not wanting anything back, about walking away." He met her eyes. Still true. She looked at him for a moment. This man she'd met through a peephole, who'd sat on her front steps in the cold, who'd moved through a parking structure with his hand on the inside of his coat and driven into a one-way street without checking whether the other end was clear. This man who was what he was and had never once claimed to be anything else. "When you were 8, she said, "you said someone should have watched and nobody did." Something moved through his face, the deep underneath thing, present and then managed. "Yes." "What happened to you?" A long pause. He looked at the floor, then back at her. "That's a long story for another time." A pause. "If there is another time, there doesn't have to be." "No," he said, "there doesn't." She stood at the window of the apartment that was hers now, in whatever provisional and beginning sense that word applied, with the backpack still on her shoulder because she hadn't put it down yet, and she looked at Dante Moretti and felt something that was not gratitude exactly. Gratitude was too simple, too clean for what this was. What this was had more weight than gratitude, more complication, more acknowledgement of what it cost a person to see something clearly and act on it without needing to be thanked. "Thank you," she said anyway, because the other thing didn't have a word. He nodded. He opened the door. "The tree outside your window keeps its leaves until December usually," he said. "Longer than most." She looked at him. He left. The door closed. She stood in the middle of the apartment in the quiet and breathed. And after a while she took the backpack off her shoulder and set it on the bed, and she unzipped the front pocket and took out the photograph. The gap-toothed kid in the yellow sweater, gymnasium floor, the before time. And she set it on the windowsill where the light from the tree street came in. She looked at it for a long time. Then she went to the kitchen and found the pots and found a box of pasta in the cabinet that someone had left or put there. And she boiled water and made something to eat and sat at the table and ate it. And the clock on the kitchen wall here ran on time, exactly on time, and she watched it while she ate. The years that followed did not move in straight lines. She enrolled in the spring semester, 3 months after the November morning she'd walked out of that building with a half-full backpack and a photograph. Dr. Fontaine was a small, precise woman who had seen enough non-traditional students that she'd lost the habit of treating the gaps in their histories as deficits rather than data. And she looked at Alara's situation the way an engineer looked at a load-bearing problem, practically, without sentiment, with a great deal of attention to what was actually there versus what the standard template called for. The first semester was brutal. Not the material. The material was hard, but it was the good kind of hard. The kind that had a system underneath it that rewarded the specific skill Alara had spent 19 years developing without knowing that's what she was doing. The ability to read a room, to track variables, to maintain composure under conditions that would break most people's concentration. She had that in abundance. What she didn't have was the infrastructure that other students had built over years. The study habits, the tolerance for sitting still in a library without listening for footsteps, the ability to participate in a seminar without flinching when voices were raised. She built those things. Slowly, and with the specific, unglamorous effort of someone learning to use muscles that had been compensating for other muscles for so long that the new pattern felt wrong before it felt right. She had nightmares. She had days when the weight of the accumulated years pressed down so hard that she sat in a bathroom stall between classes, with her back against the stall wall and breathed through her nose until she could move again. She had professors who frustrated her, and ones who saw her clearly enough that she felt the old, dangerous warmth of being seen and had to teach herself that this version was safe. She didn't contact Sandra. Not for the first year, not for the second. She thought about her with the specific, complicated frequency of someone whose relationship to a thing was too tangled to be simple hatred or simple love and had to be held at a distance until it could be examined clearly. She thought about the hand gripping her wrist as she left. She thought about the counselor's number on a piece of paper. She didn't know if Sandra had called it. She chose, deliberately, not to find out for a long time. She graduated with a degree in social work in the 4th year. In a ceremony she sat through with the straight-back composure she'd built for herself and the specific private pride of someone who knew the exact weight of what they were holding. Dr. Fontaine was there. She shook Alara's hand and said something brief and specific that Alara would remember for the rest of her life, though she never repeated it to anyone because some things lost their weight when they were handled by too many people. She took a job at a youth services organization in the city 3 months after graduation. Entry-level, underpaid, the work of someone who had just started rather than someone who was already good at it. She was already good at it, not because of the degree, or not only, but because she knew from the inside what the kids in those offices were carrying, could read the specific geometries of their fear and their hope and their performed indifference, could sit with them in the bureaucratic fluorescent quiet and make the room feel like something other than another system that was going to process them and spit them out unchanged. She moved up, not fast. She didn't trust fast, had learned that patient and incremental was the only kind of building that held. She moved up because the work was good, and because she was good at it, and because she stayed when people left and learned what they'd left behind. Bulk. The letter from Sandra arrived in the 7th year. Not a phone call. A letter, handwritten, on the kind of paper that came in the cheap multi-packs from the drugstore, the ink slightly smeared on the second page where a left hand had passed over it. Alara's name and the address of the organization, which was not her home address, she had been careful about that, in Sandra's handwriting, which she recognized the way she recognized the water stain and the broken radiator, in her bones. Without needing to think about it, she sat with the unopened letter on her desk for 2 days before she read it. It was not long. Sandra wrote that she had been sober for 4 years. She wrote the number of a meeting she attended on Thursday evenings in the neighborhood, not because she expected Alara to come, but because specificity felt more honest than vagueness. She wrote that she had been seeing a therapist for 2 years, which was covered by a program she'd found through the counselor at the facility. The same counselor, the same number, the one Alara had told her to call the morning she walked out. She wrote that she was not asking for forgiveness, that she understood if the letter itself was unwelcome, that she wanted Alara to know she was alive and what the shape of her life looked like now. She wrote, "I know what I did. I know all of it. I'm not asking you to forget it. I just wanted you to know that I'm living inside knowing it rather than running from it. I thought you deserved to know." She signed it Mom, and then crossed out Mom, and wrote Sandra, and then left both. Alara read the letter twice. She folded it back along its original creases. She put it in the drawer of her desk where she kept the photograph, which lived on every desk she'd ever had since that first apartment, the gap-toothed kid in the yellow sweater, the before time. She left the letter in the drawer for 3 weeks. Then she wrote back. Not long. Not forgiveness, and not its absence. Something more honest than either. Something that said, "I received your letter. I'm glad you're alive. The shape of my life is good." She signed it with her name and included no return address. The address on the envelope was the organization's. She mailed it on a Tuesday morning on her way to work, standing at the mailbox for a moment with it in her hand before she let it go, and then she let it go. She was director of youth services by the 10th year, in an office with a window that looked out onto a courtyard where the kids came and went, and she had built the things she'd been building. Not quickly, not cleanly, not without cost. from the specific raw material of everything that had happened in that apartment and everything she'd taught herself since. She had a life that was hers, not the life she'd imagined at 19 from inside those walls, because the life she'd imagined then had been too small, constrained by the dimensions of what she'd known. Bigger, more specific, filled with the particular texture of things she'd chosen rather than inherited. Friends who knew the general shape of her history without needing every detail. A neighborhood she'd learned room by room. A cat she'd acquired from a colleague who was moving and had named something foolish that Alara hadn't bothered to change. She slept without listening. That was the thing she noticed most, even years in. She slept without listening for footsteps, without the body's vigilance, the cataloging machine running all night. She slept like someone who had internalized, on the cellular level, that the rooms she was in were hers and safe and would remain so when she wasn't watching. Bam. On a Sunday evening in October, sitting on the small porch of the house she'd rented for 3 years and owned for 1, with the last light going orange through the trees and the cat on the railing doing the considering a jump calculation it always did without following through, she took out her phone. She typed a number from memory. She had never stored it in her phone. She had not used it in a long time. She typed, "Thank you. Still. Always." She sent it. She put the phone on the porch railing beside the cat and watched the light move through the trees. The cat decided against the jump, sat down, looked at her with the flat yellow-eyed judgment of a creature that had never had to earn its comfort. Her phone lit up. She looked at the screen. "You're welcome. Always." She put the phone face down on the railing. She looked at the trees. She breathed the October air, which had the specific quality of October air in that neighborhood. Leaves and cold coming, and underneath both of them, something clean. Something that was just air being air, the world being its current, uncomplicated self. The girl who had lain on a mattress counting bruises like a calendar was nowhere and everywhere. She was in the hands that had packed a half-empty backpack. She was in the muscles that had learned to sleep. She was in the photograph in the desk drawer, gap-toothed, yellow sweater, still in the gymnasium before the long education of what rooms could do to a person. Alara sat on her porch and let the evening come in. She had built something out of what she'd been given, not despite it exactly, but not because of it either, alongside it. The way trees grew around the things that interrupted them, incorporating the obstacle into the shape, becoming something that couldn't have been predicted from the seed. The cat jumped down from the railing and went inside. She stayed a while longer. The light went. She sat in the dark and breathed and did not measure the time by anything except its own passing, and that was enough. And she knew it was enough. And the knowing had the weight of something that had been earned across a very long distance, in very small increments, by someone who refused, even when refusing cost everything, to stop.